So, welcome. Nerves down. We're starting podcast. We're doing men's mental health. We're talking about men's mental health in November. Touching on a couple of things. I have my notepad here to make sure the conversation flows. And we've got Chris and Rebecca, and we're going to introduce ourselves and talk about why men's mental health is important to us. So, Chris, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I'm Chris and I'm the Vice President of Societies and Volunteering for this year. Becky, do you want to tell them who you are?
Yeah, I'm Becky. I'm Mental Health Officer this year. I'm part of a group called Campaign Officers, so we all campaign on different issues alongside our studies. I'm Mental Health Officer and I love being it.
Fantastic. And I am Seb Ripley and I'm the Vice President Heath Park Campus. So we'll go right to it straight away. Why is men's mental health important to you guys? I'll start to give you guys some kind of time to think. I think for me, men's mental health there's always this conversation around men being strong and the stigma around it, which we'll touch on in a little bit. And from my previous experiences, I went to an all-boys school, which you can imagine, there are certain stigmas which are maintained there. I think coming to university, there was a big shift for me, and again, we'll talk about that in a minute. But being a part of something which you see lads around you sort of acting in a different way and sort of come together in a sense of community, which you don't see for the rest of the year sometimes. Men's mental health is obviously important to me, and seeing things more recently, it's affecting lots of people around me. It's good to see people talking about it more. But what about you guys?
Well, I think for me, there's a couple of things that make it really important to me. Firstly, when I was a lot younger, I lost one of my friends to their poor mental health, and I think that's really sort of driven me from the get-go, back from being in secondary school, being at a young age, having to have something that I've got to deal with, has really sort of pushed me to be like, actually, this is something I really want to get involved with and help with. And I think the other aspect for me is over the pandemic, over the lockdown, seeing people around me, their mental health decline. The guys around me that just sort of being stuck in their houses, doing their degrees from home over Zoom, just watching the kind of sort of that sort of the difficulty, the struggle they had with that is another reason why I think it's really an important thing to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, from a female's perspective, it's really interesting to see everyone sort of band together, sort of work together and raise money and do different fundraising. And I've always admired how groups come together and they actually do grow mustaches together or fundraise or do some runs, and everyone can get involved, but it's really nice to see that men just bundle together and just talk to each other openly about mental health when it has become such a serious issue because of lockdown and even coming out, and there's new anxieties rising and all that, but right now everyone's coming together to raise money for a fantastic cause, so I think it's brilliant.
I think we'll touch on COVID, I think, in the lockdown a little bit. So for me, I think lockdown was an interesting one. It was actually quite a bit of a blur, the whole COVID situation, because I started this role when I was this role last year. So everything was really unfamiliar for me. So it kind of went in a blur, and I can't really pinpoint things that happened last year. And it was different, obviously, being outside of that education setting, being in a working setting. And I think as soon as we sort of came out of it, and obviously this year's been so different for me in a second SAB year with a new team and just a completely different experience, and some anxiety in terms of like interaction with people, I think, and it's not the same as it was before. I'm not really sure why. I think it's around Cardiff there are new faces that you don't recognise, even the ones you don't know you don't even recognise. It's a bit strange. So I think that's how it really affected me over the lockdown. Luckily, I was very well supported through the SU and my good group of mates as well. But what about you guys? How did the lockdown really affect you? For me, just that initial barrier to going out was there definitely.
I think for me, it was easy during the lockdown to get into bad habits. It was easy to sort of create these behaviours that weren't positive for mental health. You staying in bed till 2 p.m, things like that. Things just because it was you didn't have anywhere to be because you couldn't go outside. You couldn't go to places. I think for me, that's what really kind of affected my mental health during the lockdown, during the pandemic, is the fact that actually you get into these bad habits, you start looking after yourself as properly as you probably would. Even things like going for a walk, you don't even, you just slowly stop doing that because you're not doing all the other things you do. I think that for me was really the sort of the sort of linchpin of the pen, the bit that's like, actually this is what's sort of bringing me down about it.
Yeah, no, I think my experience of lockdown, the one thing I really craved was people my own age. Yeah. So my family, if they're watching this, I'm really sorry, but my dad's over 60 and my mum's a bit older as well. My brother's 18 and I don't know what Call of Duty is like or Fortnite or anything like that. I don't play on the PlayStation, sorry. But for me, I really craved social interaction with someone of my own age, and you get that at university. And all of my course mates were sort of in the same sort of situation, but you kind of just felt really isolated and alone. And then you come back into a university setting, and some people are now living in studios, they're now living with other people they don't know because they didn't know how to process finding a house. So just went with people they sort of knew, but maybe are not quite happy right now. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's like walking on broken glass at the minute with people around you. You're glad that you can see people and hug people and just have that social interaction, but at the same time you kind of feel fragile in what you're doing and saying. Yeah,
I completely agree. You sort of touched on like a legacy of COVID in terms of things aren't really the same. And the classic one for me was the house that I live in now. They filmed the virtual viewing, wide angle camera lens on it, so it's absolutely tiny, but it looks really quite spacious in the video. So that's my housing nightmare. I think, Chris, you also touched on the fact that, mental health is also something that we do, something that happens every day. It's which is something that I not necessarily learned, but came to terms with a little bit more in the last few years, which is that it ebbs and flows every day. So it's when we talk about mental health, especially I think amongst men in my circle, you think the extremes, because those are the things you hear about in men's mental health. You hear about the extremes of mental health. So people seem to tend to go away from the fact that you can have a poor day and stay in bed until 2:00, and that's fine. And it might come back up the next day, but we do have to be conscious of this, is the same as our physical health, making sure that we are monitoring where we are and where we are. So we'll move on to Movember a little bit, and this is where I have a little bit of a spiel about Movember, so I'll try and remember this. Movember is obviously celebrated through November, fantastic. Originally started out as just growing a moustache, and I believe it was just around testicular and prostate cancer. But, as the conversation has changed around men's health, we're now brought into mental health and things like that. So really, really fantastic charity. It's huge now. It's basically its own brand. Interested to hear from you guys before I talk about my pitiful moustache. What has your involvement with Movember been in the past, if it has been at all?
So this is actually my first year really getting involved with Movember. Starting with things like this podcast, starting with donating to my friends who I know mostly other unis doing their own things, and a lot of them in their sports teams. I've got friends in Exeter, I've got friends in Bath, and friends in Bristol who are all sort of taking it up this year. When previously when I knew them back, pre-uni, it's not something I would ever thought they would have done. Which is great. It's a great thing to sort of see and to sort of support them with. So but I'm not very good at growing a moustache myself. I'll give it a go and see how far I get. But no, definitely this year for me, it's a first experience, and I'm happy that I'm getting involved finally with Movember as a charity, as a thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's great. I love supporting my family or my friends that are doing it. I try to donate to fundraisers where I can, even if I've not spoken to people in like 2 years and I've not seen them since secondary school. If they are doing something for it, I will try and donate where I can. It starts a conversation going if you haven't seen them in a while as well, so that's always really nice. But it's nice to see people doing runs if they can't necessarily grow a moustache, or if they're doing some sort of movement or a dance class to do with fundraising for it. Always up for either going or donating or sharing about it on social media. So it's little things like that just sort of I do on my behalf, that I can do whatever to increase awareness without growing a moustache.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they've done more to try and be more inclusive of people who don't want to grow a moustache, whoever that is, which I think is really good, and it's forward thinking of a charity which is directed towards men's mental health and men's health. I've done it for a few years. At school, we weren't allowed facial hair, so it was like the only time that we could have any facial hair. I think I got disqualified when I was at school for dyeing it because it was blonde. So it was blonde and it looked awful and no one could see it. So I used to dye it, and then a member of staff found it in my room and had me disqualified from the Movember that we did. We ran in-house. But yeah, I think my involvement mainly has been through sports clubs.
Yeah.
I guess a massive following through sports clubs, which is always really good. My housemate last year as well, he did really well. So he was diagnosed with testicular cancer. COVID has thrown me off 3 years ago, 2 years ago, can't remember. And in November he did a massive push on fundraising, raised loads and loads and loads of money, really cool, and then was invited to like the Mo Awards in London, and he had an absolute ball. So it looks awesome. But they celebrate the top few fundraisers, but he did a really good job. So shout out to Sam John if you're watching. But yeah, he did awesome, and he could grow a great moustache from Movember as well. So our house did it last year. It was basically his moustache. He was there like, yes. But yeah, mine's, what day are we on now? 5th. 5 days ago. I said you can feel it, but you can't see it. But yeah, it's not too bad. We're starting. We've talked about the progression of Movember as a charity and as their work. So I think this has been reflected in sort of national. So we'll talk about national, we'll talk about personal as well. So what have you guys noticed in sort of the national and international conversation around mental health? Because it's definitely changed. But what was the most noticeable thing, do you think, we thought, actually, loads of people talk about mental health now?
I don't think social media massively, like just post on that as a platform. Even just noticing in the last few years, sort of on whatever platform you use, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, just the amount of people that are, even if they're not posting something themselves, like we're doing this for mental health, they'll be sharing, they'll be liking, they'll be commenting, they'll be tagging, they'll be. There's less of a, I don't want to be seen to be interacting with this post because it's about mental health, and I don't want people to think certain things about me. And it's more of a, actually, it's okay for me to support this friend. It's okay for me to say, actually, I'm proud of this person for doing something around mental health. Let me share this. Let me comment on this. Let me try and get this interaction. Work the algorithms, try and get this out there. Whether that's a fundraiser, whether that's an awareness, whatever that entails. Absolutely. Just there's a lot more. There's been I think a marked increase in the amount of people that are not necessarily doing it themselves, but sharing their friends that are doing it, which I think has been great, the way that it's exploded out from that.
Absolutely.
Personally.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Social media is such an important influence, and people liking, people sharing different posts. Dr. Alex, who was on Love Island, obviously became mental health ambassador for the country, and that really got people talking who are perhaps of a younger age than we are, that do watch Love Island. But it's still getting out there, it's sharing the posts, and I think for younger children as well, they're getting more of an awareness. Starting through like mental health training, or just having more of an open conversation with their teachers if they're really young. But my brother, who's in sixth form, so he's 17, he's just starting mental health first aid training, which I've been through, but I did it at 20. He's doing it now at 17. So it's getting younger, which is really good to see. So I think it's a combination of social media and also changing attitudes. And I think because the conversation is changing, people who are a bit younger, who are in younger years, they're getting more active and sort of progressing it as well.
I think you touched on a really good thing there as well. Something that I hadn't really picked up on is that a lot of celebrities as well, sort of influencers, you talked about Dr. Alex, but there's others as well that are now starting to talk about, and you saw these sort of, big famous people that lots of people know, that lots of people look up to, that are now actually saying it, that the younger generation, like you say, are able to sort of look up and go, actually, well, if they can talk about it, it must be okay for me to talk about. Which I think is fantastic.
Fantastic, yeah. I think, for me, it's a couple of weird things for me. So, one of the things where I sort of noticed a wider reach around the conversation of mental health was when people I didn't expect would ask you how you were. Yeah. So, actually, I've gone very poorly into this. My mum would always check on how I was, but more recently in a different way. So, ask me really quite directly, how are you doing? Which I think was a noticeable thing on reflection, not necessarily the first thing I noticed, but I think actually, this is a definite change. I think also for me, it was the way that when a friend or someone I knew or someone friends lost their lives through poor mental health, what was the response from the people around them? That has changed as well, and it's much more celebratory of their lives and doing more for men's mental health and trying to promote it more. And whereas before it was more secretive and it wasn't something that was shared. So I think that's a really positive change as well. And fundraising just comes from absolutely everywhere. So a charity I've done some work with is called the Ted Senior Foundation. I say work for, fundraising, I haven't done any work for. They were set up for a TED Senior who also went to school in Monmouth, which is where I was from, and had very good friends in the sports club that I play for here. And the foundation was set up in his name. And it does really good stuff. So it also looks really quite intent at university structures. So putting paid sort of ambassadors for mental health into sports clubs. So they do some work at Bristol, and we've done lots of fundraising here but just having whereas charities before you'd associate yourself with a charity, now we're moving, more clubs are associating themselves with mental health charities, which is really, really good stuff. And yeah, something that is definitely noticeable in student communities. I sometimes worry, and it'd be good to hear your thoughts, sometimes worry that we are in a bubble. So we've gone to university, my sister went to university, but I have some cousins and some friends of mine who didn't go to university and haven't experienced that increase in mental health awareness. Do you know anyone like that, and who might not even be on the same page in terms of our bubble potentially?
Yeah, that's a good point. So when I mentioned before about my friends at different unis that are doing it, it's interesting that I said different unis. It's at university that actually, you do have this sort of almost change from when you were at sixth form or secondary school, where mental health is something that, okay, maybe you talk about your friends, maybe it's something that is a big thing within your community or whatever, but actually at uni we have a mental health officer, we have full teams both within the union and the university who deal with mental health as a subject, and that's not something that is feasible for a small sixth form or a small college or a small secondary school. So I definitely think obviously that's a massive thing that sort of massive help at university, that actually there is a lot of services that are just so readily available with so many people talking about it. And like I said yourself, Becky, you're the mental health officer. We even have a position within our democratic structure as how ingrained it kind of becomes within the university. Whereas people, friends that haven't been, they don't have that. They sort of leave secondary or they leave sixth form and that's it. Where do they go from there? Where's the continuation of the conversation? It's not there. So I definitely think that's it's almost like for them they don't have that next step, they don't have that extra system that they go on to after leave sixth form.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. So my friendship group sort of outside of other unis is quite small, but when I said, I'm going to be mental health officer, it's like, oh, we have one of them, or oh, we've got someone who campaigns and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's always good to see like universities like Bath, like Salford, like Manchester, reaching out and sort of doing different roles within the students' union, within the university itself, where they encourage sort of campaigning on different causes and stuff like that. But I think even when I got the role, I was trying to explain to my mum what that was. And my mum got very confused. I was a bit like, you're a walking counsellor? No. But it's starting to get the conversation going with sort of people who haven't necessarily gone to uni, who maybe back in their day, they didn't have anything like this. And now that people have different roles, it's becoming more of a norm. And actually it's more accepting to be like, oh, how was your role today? Like, what have you done? What campaigns have you done? Kind of thing. And I think within the campaign officer team ourselves, we're always really supportive of what each other does, what campaigns we do, and mental health ties into so many things. So it's great to see everyone bringing it in and sort of campaigning on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and also the more we exist in this bubble, obviously, but I think the more we educate ourselves and talk to each other and about conversation, it is infectious. After you leave university and go into a workplace, you have that ability to sort of maintain the conversation at a relatively good level, and then obviously as national stuff goes on, it's easier to keep going. So we spoke a little bit about school. So what have your experiences from school to university? Obviously, well, for me, it was quite a massive shift in terms of the conversation around mental health. So was that something that you noticed as well with your schooling?
When I was in secondary, as I mentioned briefly at the start, obviously I was with my friends to their poor mental health, and sort of all of our friends kind of came together at that point, and it wasn't like a coherent, we've all got each other. It was more of actually we're dealing with it our own way. It felt very separated, very segregated, very actually not something you didn't talk about, but something that you didn't communicate about that. I think a major difference here at uni is that whole actually there are people for you to talk to, and it's not a difficult thing to find. It's not as difficult of a thing to find the support, and at the same time you're obviously breaking down that stigma from when you're at school, like I said before, about how you've got mental health, obviously you've got these services. So definitely at university, that definitely felt there's more of a, actually, this is something you talk about. This is something that isn't just brushed under the carpet, isn't just sort of this happened to us, but let's not talk about it, and how it's making us feel and how it's affecting us. That's my experience of coming to uni with it.
Yeah, I think with my secondary school, it was very much a sort of suffer in silence kind of atmosphere. There was no sort of designated support that you could easily access. There was no sort of mental health designated person in each year group. You didn't often hear people talking about it. It would only come up as sort of a teacher training day every now and again, just mention the subject, and that's it for the year. But, as I say, my brother is still in the same school and he's being trained as first aider now, which is great.
So they've progressed?
They have progressed massively. To having people in the year, to having people support that way. But when I came into uni, I struggled to find support my first year. Okay. So I struggled with my flatmates a bit. They used to go out and drink, and I do law, so much of my life was reading or doing lectures, unfortunately. It still is. But it was just, I tried to access support and I couldn't quite find it because the website wasn't user-friendly. I didn't know how to submit myself to try and get counselling or go through the process or anything like that. Whereas now, after lockdown and through lockdown, it's so much more user-friendly and it's so easy to self-refer yourself or just to talk to anyone. My email's always open. But just to approach anyone or reach out over social media or anything, it's so much easier to do. And I think if I was in the same situation as I was in first year, I definitely would have approached someone much better than I would. Yeah. It's so good, the reflection back on it.
And sort of acting as that mentor and being like, actually, first year is a bit stressful. Yeah. I think the thing that we forget is, especially as you grow older as well, you build support structures. Yeah. So at the end of school, you'll have almost every support structure that you think you want in place. And then go to university and it's just shattered. And you haven't got anyone. And if you put yourself, and then again, you have to find people you want to socialise with. Yeah. And that is such a difficulty if you have high contact hours or you have lots of reading to do outside of university. Or even if you prioritise university differently to going out. People do that even if they have high contact hours. So being able to find that support structure quickly is quite an important thing. We're going to move on to stigma. I said I'd put this earlier, but I forgot. So we're going to talk about stigma now. People always talk about stigma around mental health, and I'm not even sure if I've got my own head around it, if I'm honest. In preparation for this podcast, I was just thinking, what am I going to say about the stigma? For me, I still have friends who go, don't ask me how I'm feeling. Like, if you think I'm annoyed, just don't ask, because you'll annoy me more. Yeah. So I think there are still plenty of my friends. To be honest, I'm, to an extent, sometimes I'm like that. I'm like, don't ask me how I am, because it's only going to wind me up. But then, if I take 2 seconds, I go, actually, okay, I can engage in this conversation. I can do better than this. And I think being able to know the nuances of your mates. So this one who says, don't ask me how I am. I know how to check if he's okay without going, are you all right? And there was some social media posts and infographics a couple of years ago. They were like, how to ask if someone's okay without saying, "Are you okay?" And there are different ways, and you're the only one that know your mates. So being able to, even if they have that stigma, being able to get through to them, I think, it's potentially born out of sexism and the sporting culture as well is really quite particular. It'd be interesting to hear from your side, Chris, around societal groups, because my side has always been sport, and there's definitely a stigma in sport around mental health. But is there so much away from the sports pitch in terms of societal groups? Do you think society groups?
Yeah, I think society is so. I think society is probably a little bit further behind the curve than sports groups with the whole Movember. Actually, let's talk about, let's open this conversation up. I definitely do think it's something that's improving. I mean, even last year we had lots of welfare officers. We had them. Yeah. They had people coming to them, which is, on one hand you might think, we had lots of people coming to us, but actually no, we had lots of people coming to us. That's a good thing. It means people aren't just saying, there's no one I can go to. Saying, actually, there is that welfare officer in my society. I'm part of this group that has this person that I can go and talk to. And I think for them, having that one person sort of on the ground, sort of right there, that's actually like a student that's there in the group, that runs the group essentially, that is there designated just for that. I think that definitely helps them in societies.
And that shows that there is evidence that this sort of stigma is being broken down, that you can approach people. And I think that's quite an interesting point that you say in terms of, you see increased numbers of people asking for help. You think that's a bad thing? Actually, it's good to see that people are approaching the support services that exist.
Do you know, even just walking around campus, people look at... So I wear this hoodie quite often because it's comfy and it's warm, and it's one of the best hoodies I own.
They are soft.
So. But even when people look at you and sort of read mental health officer on the back, I'm like, I don't really want to approach someone that says mental health officer or something like that. And I see myself as quite friendly and open to talk to. Absolutely. And I think stigma, even, when your housemate or your friend is down, you can see it in the way they sigh, you can see it in the way they're talking to you, whether they're shut off in their room for a while. And I think sometimes the best thing is just even not to say anything and just give them a hug or something. Because that can mean the world to people, even smiling at people in the street, on the pavement. That can sometimes make someone's day, but you just never really know behind the scenes what everyone's going through, or you don't feel comfortable quite to approach a random stranger and feel like, I'm really not good, but I really need your help. Because I've had emails over the past couple of weeks that are like, please, can you help me? Can you guide me? I need support. And I've always been, let's go have a chat. Let's go have a coffee. I love my Costa. I love my Starbucks. But yeah, I think there's such a stigma about reaching out will not help you, but it will. Just talking will help.
I think for me, in terms of mental health, there's been massive sort of with my friends. It's almost like you used to always sort of say, "How are you?" It's kind of like a throwaway comment. It used to be it's so much of a "How are you?" and you just expect to kind of be like, "Oh yeah, I'm alright. Oh good mate, how are you?" kind of thing. Like, whereas now it's almost like you sort of people remember a minute ago said where you said about how your mum's actually saying "How are you?" It's almost like, for me, it's almost like I say, "Oh, how are you?" And it's like, "Oh, I'm alright." So no, how are you actually doing? It's almost like there's that change. That's slowly getting there. It's also, I've just noticed last sort of not really recently, is that actually people saying, no, how are you actually doing? Like it's not just a throwaway, oh yeah, I'm good, thanks, how are you kind of thing. It's like, no, how are you actually doing, how you feel today?
I think that also relates to sort of like how you maintain your own mental health, because then you become more aware of people around you. Chris was saying an interesting point around, managing your mental health helps looking out for other people's mental health, especially. I think one of my housemates this year has taken a lot of time to look after himself and his own mental health in the last year of a lockdown. And he can ask some really quite good questions when you come in. You go, and sort of that notice. So he might not ask on the first day when you come in and you dump your back down and you're a bit in a grub. But then he'll ask on the second day, been down a little bit, are you all right? And I go, yeah, I'm fine, mate, don't you worry about it. And then we'll have that discussion, whatever it is. But it's that noticing that it might have been going on a while, and notice that someone actually cares, or someone that's close to you all the time. I think if you're in tune with your own habits and things that might cause you to peak or trough, or whatever it is, it does become easier to notice things. We're going to talk about what we're doing for Movember. So the current thinking is we have a Movember have reps across universities, so really well structured, well set up. But you're going to talk a little bit about what people can do if they don't want to grow a moustache and still want to be involved in men's mental health, won't you?
Yeah, so on the Movember website, they do suggest different things. You can do your own sort of campaigning, whether it can be like a bake sale or if you want to do your own sort of small fundraising thing. But I think the main sort of thing they're suggesting for people is to walk 60 kilometres during November. Just 60 kilometres, take it at your own speed. And you can always just donate or support your friends or make their moustaches funny handlebars or something. But, you know, support them that way.
Well, I think I'll try and get something before I go for handlebars. The classic one as well is if you've got a load of lads doing it in the house or anyone fundraising in any way, it's like, I'll donate you £5 if you donate me £5.
Just go for it.
Last year we did Move for Movember, which is the 60 kilometres. We did it in-house in the SU. And I think I ended up having to do like a half marathon on the last day.
Wow.
So it's like, no. But there's loads of different ways that we can raise money for Movember, so that's fantastic. I think we'll round it off there. It's been really good to chat to you guys.
Yeah.
And you have a mental health podcast as well, your own, called...
Yeah, Mental Matters. So it's hopefully come out every couple of weeks, but my first one should be coming out. And I chat to Ashley, the BME officer, and we just have a conversation about our well-being and homesickness. And we're going to have different ones on sort of stress, sort of Christmas fun episode, and we're just going to go from there and see where it goes.
Wonderful. Amazing. So it sounds awesome. So check out, obviously you'll be watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, so make sure you check out Mental Matters at Another Point. Thank you very much both, and thank you for chatting about our own mental health and things that are going on in Cardiff. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.